Yeah.
Oh, the Bala Simcha is on the line.
I don't know where my ball is. Which table? The counter. Wow, the counter. Oh, fashion. Sugar. No, it's sugar. Oh, I don't know where it is.
Hast du den Krieg?
Oh, the bunny? Yeah.
Ja.
Ja, aber
Ja, das ist denke, was das noch aber das ist
Hello?
Oh, Rabbi Moshe.
Yeah, who's this?
It's
Stop.
your brother Levi. Bez Hashem will be starting the Siyum momentarily. Do you want to just tell us which Masechta you'll be making Siyum on?
Masaita.
She. Alle 49 Dafim of Masechta, beautiful. Mazel and Bracha. Very special occasion for us all. We're all joining in your Simcha. After the Siyum, you'll give us a few words of inspiration, either about the Masechta, about all the Avodas HaKodesh, etc. Whenever you're ready, you can take it away and be mechazik us with the Siyum, especially for the 9 days, please.
You ready to go? Is you ready to start?
Chavod, go ahead.
Okay, so the Mishnah this thing got a whole bunch of stuff that winded down after the Chorban Beis HaMikdash, building up to the Chorban Beis HaMikdash, so the Spanish Ban Sheni, and afterwards as well. Things got worse and worse. And so the Mishnah finishes off. Mishameis Rebbe was a number of years after the Chorban Beis HaMikdash. Mishameis Rebbe, when Yehuda Nasi died, but the Mishnah finishes off. Batel Anava. That was the end of the era of Anava, of true humility, the era of Scheit, and true fear of doing an Avera. So that's what the Mishnah finishes off. The Gemara finishes off. Amalei Rav Yosef Tana. Rav Yosef with the Amiroim and Babel, many years after, a few generations after Rabbi, said to the person who reviewed the Mishnayos in front of him, said, "Leitisnei Anava, you should not review don't say the word Anava when you're saying this Mishnah. Don't say that Batal Anava. Anava is another Ikka Anava, because I am here, and as Rashi says, Ani Amvas, and I'm a humble man. I'm a person, a patient man, a humble man, and so if you can't really say, it doesn't really apply. You can't really apply to this thing of Batal Anava." Amr Rav Nachman Tanar, on the contrast, Rav Nachman was a different Abayra, and he said to his reviewer, the person who reviewed the Mishnah in front of him, Leitisne Yiras Chet, you should not say the word Yiras Chet in this Mishnah. When Meir Rabbi died, Yiras Chet, the fear of Chet was nullified because the Ikka Anab, because I am here and I am one who is very afraid of Chet. Hadran Allah Egla Rufa Slikala Mesech Saita, and finish Rufa and finish Saita. Hopefully we'll get back to it one day. Just before we finish the Siyum, I want to finish off what it says. The Brisa, Pinchas Ben Yair, says at the end of the Chassidus Mevira de Ruach HaKodesh. Chassidus brings to Ruach HaKodesh. Ruach HaKodesh Mevira de Tchias HaMeisim. Ruach HaKodesh brings Tchias HaMeisim. And Tchias HaMeisim Ba Yadele Ya Navi Zechrein Levracha. V'mheira v'yameinu Yahweh v'yigalenu Ken Yehi Ratzain Amen. Hadan Lach Mesech Saita v'Hadan Achalon. Da'atan Lach Mesech Saita v'Da'at Achalon. Leinis Nishim Minach Mesech Saita v'Leinis Nashim Minon. Leiba Amadeim v'Lo B'Amadasi. Hadan Lach Mesech Saita v'Da'at Achalon. Da'atan Mesech Saita v'Da'at Achalon. Leinis Nashim Minach Mesech Saita v'Leinis Nashim Minon. Leiba Amadeim v'Lo B'Amadasi. Hadan Lach Mesech Saita v'Hadan Achalon. Da'atan Lach Mesech Saita v'Da'at Achalon. Leinis Nashim Minach Mesech Saita v'Leinis Nashim Minon. Leiba Amadeim v'Lo B'Amadasi. Hirat من أخذنا هنا بالهيا بيسينا شيء hirat من سيلهم ويلهم هذا شيء من ليلهم هذا خنين وبابا رما بابا نخما بابا خايبا بابا أمر بابا رفم بابا رخشة بابا سوق بابا عدم بابا دار بابا هرنا عندنا هنا تبص في سام بيس صابنيا نخم مساتين وبنيا كان نخم مساتين تمسك كان بيس كمان شغل من ساتين ساقم ما إيه بتخك مين متساقك لأنهم هي اللي بيسمى بخوك خلانا يعيش لأن الناس كي بخوك كيفام خي إنساني بارك تعالى عندنا خوك آمين 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 سلام ما يدنا نحن فنا قادرين على إنه شيء سانت بخكنا ميداش إنسان خكنا ميشي كراني شو أنا مشكلة هي مشكلة أنا مشكلة هي سندي بسيرة هي مشكلة دوار متيلم أنا ميلم مكان مسخار هي ميلم مكان مسخار أنا راتم أنا راتم خيرهم هذا بهين راتم في شاخة عشان بعتدين هم دويدين في شاخة كان شيء مهمة لياسي ما مني أفتح باقي راتم أنا أخذ هذا شيء مش عايز تاني لسان مسخ صيت كين تعزين العصر مسخ الصور مخيرم ولسان واليوم ويد الله من إيش الأنصار كاين مسكولي بيسام مسخ بعافا خصوص خاطر ما مرام مسمي خامم جام زار الشيء تام شتيرم بي وبي زاري زي هذيلهم since كان بي مسالخ خاتن خايسخ مشخ خات تيش مالخ ما كتير هيسن سخاقم كبير بو يوم ما خبي سيكون خاشنيس خايم إيرخ منو مسمي شكابد أدينا أيضا يتين أدينا يبارك سامي وشالم
Mazel tov. Very nice. Great.
There's an interesting story about Rav Nachman. Says that he was a Yerei Chet. So the story goes that Rav Nachman, when his mother was pregnant with him, the stargazers told him that the baby that is going to be born is going to be a ganav, is going to be a real thief, a real rogue. So he's not going to know what to do. So the story was she was advised to make sure that he always wore a yarmulke. Always wore and that way that would make sure they would have yiras chet, be afraid of Hashem. And so that's why she always made sure that from when he was born, he always had the head covering, and he grew up to be there, Sir Nachman. And the Gemara says that one time his yarmulke fell off, and he was sitting underneath a date tree, palm tree, and he got so, the minute it fell off, we had such an urge to steal the dates from the tree. He started climbing up the tree. So that's an interesting story about Yiras Chet. Even we were born with even the most, we can have the most difficult character, but we can still, Hashem gives us the koyach to overcome that. Anyways, that's the story. Yeshe koyach everyone for listening. May we zeche to God Hashem very soon. All tov.
Amen, amen. Shekayach. You should keep on making lots of siyumim as Hashem. I just want to say that the Hilchas Beis Bechira Shir is going on in 20 minutes at the same link, and we'll probably use the same YouTube. For those who are watching on YouTube, you can stay on the same channel. Imagine you'll pick it up. There should be many more siyumim, the siyum of the Galos and Alam Rezachin. If anyone wants to unmute themselves and share something, the meeting will stay open for a little longer.
Okay, Shekayach. Thank you very much for the organizers. Bye-bye.
Oops. We're going to move to Pedic Dalit, fourth Pedic, chapter 4, Halacha Gimel. The Rambam says as follows: Ha'heichel shebanu bnei hagoyla. The heichel, that the palace that the bnei hagoyla, when they came up from second Beis Hamikdash, when they came back from Golos Bavel, that they built. Before we go to this, I just want to go to the previous halacha, which is Pedic. In our Rambam, it is Pedic Dalit Halacha Beis. The Rambam says as follows: Bayis Rishon, the first Beis Hamikdash, Koisel Mavdil Ben HaKodesh Ben Kodesh HaKadoshim of Yayama. There was a wall separating between Kodesh and Kodesh HaKadoshim. Its thickness was an amma. That already took place during the first Beis Hamikdash. And on that wall, outside of that wall, there was a pareiches facing the Heichel. Remember that since this wall was separating between the Kodesh and the Kodesh HaKadoshim, so there was the outside of it was facing the Kodesh, and the inside was facing Kodesh HaKadoshim. So on the side that was facing the Kodesh, there was a pareiches. Since the Mikdash is a permanent institute, so there was also a wall. Now the pareiches, it says in the pasuk, which the Rambam is going to quote later on, says in the pareiches, "Vivdila ha-pareiches lachem," that the pareiches should be separating between Kodesh and Kodesh HaKadoshim. So if they had the pareiches also in the Beis Hamikdash, and the pareiches was the one that actually separated between Kodesh and Kadoshim, why did they also have a wall? Because remember, the difference between the Mishkan and the Beis Hamikdash, the Mishkan was a temporary structure, and therefore was made out of Yerias and Krashim, but the Beis Hamikdash is a permanent structure, and that's why it's made out of a wall, rocks. So since the Beis Hamikdash is a permanent structure, so the separation between the Kodesh and Kodesh HaKadoshim was in addition to the pareiches. He also had a wall. While they were building the second Beis Hamikdash, all of a sudden they had a doubt. If the thickness of this wall, which separates, upon which the pareiches was hanging, and the pareiches is actually the one doing the separation, whether it was from the measurement of Kodesh, Midah is 40 amma. If that's the case, what would be the distance of the pareiches from the western wall of the Heichel? 21 ammas. Or was it from the measurement of Kodesh HaKadoshim, whose measurement is 20 amma? So the thickness of the pareiches would be exactly at the third of the Heichel, because the length of the entire house was 60 ammas, and the Kodesh HaKadoshim was 1/3, 20 ammas, and the Heichel was 40 ammas. Therefore, in Bayis Sheni, what did they do? They made Kodesh, Midas Kodesh HaKadoshim, they made the measurement of Kodesh HaKadoshim, they made it Esrim Amma Tmimois. They made it 20 complete Amma. Also a Kodesh Arboim Amma Tmimois. And they made the 40 the 40th they made both of them. The question was the Kodesh HaKadoshim only 19 complete Ammas, or was it 20 complete Ammas? And obviously, if the Kodesh HaKadoshim was 19 complete Ammas, then the Heichel, the Kodesh, was 40 complete Ammas. But if the Kodesh HaKadoshim was 20 complete Ammas, then the Kodesh was only 39, because in the first Beis Hamikdash, altogether, they were only 60 Ammas. So what they did in the second Beis Hamikdash is they made each of them complete amount of amas. What the Kodesh was exactly 20 amas, and the Kodesh HaKadoshim is 40 amas, complete 4 other amas. V'inichu ama yaseira ben HaKodesh ben Kodesh HaKadoshim, and they left an extra ama, an extra cubit between the Kodesh and Kodesh HaKadoshim. Leibonu koisel v'vayis sheni, and they didn't build the wall. And also shtei paroichos, they made 2 curtains. Achas mitzad Kodesh HaKadoshim. One from the side of Kodesh, achas mitzad HaKodesh, and one from the side of Kodesh. V'nei an ama, and between them there was an ama. The space in between was an ama, corresponding to the thickness of the wall that existed in the first Beis Hamikdash. But this was all in the second Beis Hamikdash. However, in the first Beis Hamikdash, there was only one curtain separating between the Kodesh and Kodesh Kadoshim. There was only one curtain separating. It says the curtain will separate. It doesn't say. Now, this is the Rambam's opinion. If we actually look in the Gemara actually says that and from the Gemara it seems, the Gemara in Yuma, our Gemara in Yuma, it seems that there were actually, even in the first Beis Hamikdash, there were also 61 cubits. And the question was, is the holiness of this wall like Kodesh or Kodesh Kadosh? But everybody agrees. The Gemara, it seems that everybody agrees that even during the first Beis Hamikdash there was also 61 amas. So my father, in his Chibur Minchas Yishalayim, he talks about it. And now, according to the Gemara, what is the reason that in the Beis Bayis Sheni they didn't make a wall to separate between Kodesh and Kadoshim, and they needed to make 2 parochas? The reason is because unlike the first Beis Hamikdash, in the first Beis Hamikdash, the total height was 120 amas. However, the first floor was only 30 amas. The second floor was 90 amas. Altogether, it was 120 amas. However, in the second Beis Hamikdash, the first floor was 40 amas. So since the height of the Heichel is 40 amas in the second Beis Hamikdash till the second floor, and a wall and the thickness of an am cannot stand in the height of 40 amas, as the Gemara explains in Baba Basra of Gimel Amud Aleph. Therefore, they didn't make a wall in the second Beis Hamikdash. However, wall was Midas HaKodesh of Midas HaChoyim. The Rambam continues. All the other Mefarshim. Let's see what the Rambam says. Halacha Gimel. Ha'echel shebanu bnei goyla hoya mea amo al mea al rumeya. Kach hoysa midas rumei. The Heichel that the people that came back from the exile of Bavel built, it was 100 cubits by 100 cubits at the height of 100 cubits. Kach hoysa midas rumei, and this was the measurement of its height. Bon goiva sheish amois otum sosum k'mo yasoidloi. So they built a foundation which was totally closed up. They built a height of 6 amas, which was totally closed and solid, and it was like a foundation to the Eichel. So what happens is, we're going to learn later on in chapter 6 that the Rambam is going to point out that there's a Snoshim, the Azore, and the Heichel and Kodesh HaKadoshim, and the Heichel, they weren't all at the same exact level. The more holier it became, the higher level it was. So from the Ezes Nashim to the Azora, there were steps. From the Azora to the Heichel, there were steps. From the Azora to the Heichel, there were steps. So there were different steps. So the steps of between right before the Ulam, there were 12 steps. And as the Rambam is going to tell us, based on the Mishnah, every step was the height of 1 amma. The height of every step was a half amma, but the amount of walking you got to walk on that step till you had to lift up your feet to get to the next step was a cubit. So every step was higher than the previous one by 1 cubit. So if there's 12 steps, so the combined height of the 12 steps is 6 ammas, 6 cubits. So corresponding to these steps, there was the utam. The utam was a foundation. So the whole Eichel was built on this foundation, and this foundation extended, so to speak, from the steps. So upon this foundation, that's where the walls stood. And the height of the walls of the Beis Hamikdash is 40 ammas, 40 cubits. And the height of the ornamental paneling, which was in the ceiling, was 1 cubit. Valgabav goivashtei amis poni. And upon it there was a height of 2 cubits, in which there was nothing. It was just a hollow. What was the purpose of this? What was the purpose of this space? Today, sheikonis bayadam. So if there's water, sometimes plumbing in a person's house, there's leaks. There's some water leaking from the roof, especially when there's heavy rain. So there's water leaking from the roof. So there should be a place for it to accumulate till it gets to the next step. And that's why it's called the place for the water to accumulate. It's called a leakage receptacle. What's interesting is, somebody raised the question, I believe a Bacher in Manchester, and he raised the question, why would we know that it didn't even the Azara, which was an open space, it didn't rain. Why didn't rain accumulate in a miraculous way? So how much the more so that in the Beis Hamikdash there weren't any leaks. So if there weren't any leaks, why did we have to design 2 ammas, 2 full cubits just for this purpose? So my father, in his commentary on the Rambam, Minchas Yerushalayim, says, we find elsewhere in the Rambam a whole discussion on see there were different porches that were surrounded the Beis Hamikdash. What did these porches serve? It doesn't even say. So my father suggests, based on a reading of the Rambam, famous Perek in Baba Basra, Mechas Abayis, Mechas Yetzia, when the whole discussion, when you sell the house, are the porches also included in the sale or not? And the Rambam has an expression that the reason that they made it in the Beis Hamikdash was because that was the way they used to build houses. In those days, you used to build a house. A house used to have a porch. Just like nowadays, most houses have a courtyard. In those days, almost every house had a porch also. So since the Beis Hamikdash is meant to be, so in addition to different Kabbalistic reasons why these things happen, there's a very interesting expression, I believe, in Tzemach Tzedek. But Tzemach Tzedek expresses regards the Toim, and he says that the reason it says Yoshes places darkness is hiddenness, and he says that the name of the Mezritcher Magid, the Mezritcher Magid says there was a very special reason why this time existed, but it's a hidden reason. It's not one that he revealed to everybody. Okay. So the Tzemach Tzedek says Neira Torah Shmini, page Taf Pezayin, Taf Peches, refers to a Zoya and Chukas, Taf Pezayin Beis, and Nidre Rabbe, about Chukas Beis. The concept of Tov Rosh Geshimoy, that the letter Tov, which means a sign, is shows on it denotes the Rishimu, which has a very high level of godliness. These closets, so to speak, they didn't have any windows to shine. Like it says, Yoshes Kleshach Sisroi, that darkness is the hidden aspects of the Eibishter. So these toim, they showed on a they're even higher than the Kruvim, because the Kruvim were on a level of Atzilus. But these toim, they were a very high level. And he says that the Tzemach Tzedek says that he heard from the Alter Rebbe, Rabbeinu Zal, the Alter Rebbe, that he heard regarding the concept of the time from the Mezritcher Magid, something that he did not yet revealed to anybody. And the Tzemach Tzedek says that the Alter Rebbe didn't even tell him what exactly it was that the Magid told him. So, Va'ama Tikra, and there's for Oivi Atikra Shalgabi be still Va'ama. The thickness of the plastering, the thickness of the beam of the roof, which was upon this leakage receptacle, was a cubit. Maziva Geva Amal, and the plastering was 1 cubit. So on top of this beam with the plaster, there's a second floor built upon it. The height of its walls are 40 cubits. And at its roof, there's and in its roof, there's a height of 1 cubit for ornamental paneling. Masayim Beistilfa. Masayim Goiva Beistilfa. 2 cubits is the height of this leakage receptacle. Va'ama Tikra, and 1 amma, 1 cubit for plastering. Va'ama Maziva. Excuse me. Va'ama Tikra is 1 cubit for the beam of the roof. Va'ama Maziva, and 1 beam for plastering. V'goiva hamaka shalish amis, and the height of the parapet, which is like a wall. We know when you build a house, you're supposed to build a wall on the roof that people shouldn't fall off the roof. It's called a parapet, a mica in Hebrew. As a matter of fact, the Rambam tells us that why don't we make a bracha when we make a mica? Because the mica is not a mitzvah in itself. Mica is only to serve a purpose that people shouldn't fall off it. So therefore, you don't make a bracha on it. But in any case, the mica is a wall that in the Beis Hamikdash was 3 amas. And then finally, the final cubit of the V'tas shel barzel k'meisayiv govei amal gabi mica sovi. There was an anti-birds guard, which was a very sharp piece of metal. The height is 1 cubit. It's all around this parapet. And the purpose is that the birds shouldn't find it very comfortable to rest upon it. So if it's sharp, then they're not going to rest upon it. And this is called that it destroyed the ravens. I guess ravens were birds that love being on the tops of buildings. So the total of everything is 100 cubits. And the Rambam continues. And we hear the Rambam is going to make his revolution. So if we go to the Mishnah, we'll see that there's 5 toy. The Mishnah says that there were 38 toim. There were 15 in Tzafin and 15 in Dorim. And it explains how did we have Tzafin and Dorim 15? Because you had 5 upon 5 and then 5 upon them. Now, how did these toim work? So if you look at most Mefarshim, they say that on each side of the wall, there were 5 rooms, one after another. In other words, there was a space which was designated for toim all around the ulam was 11 amas, so the remainder of the heichel is 89 amas. So these 89 amas, you divide it up in 5. So every ta is approximately 20 amas, and you need some space between one ta and the next. So some types of walls to differentiate amongst them. So it comes out almost to 20 amas each ta. The width of the length of each ta, where the width of was as we learned soon, 6 amas. Comes the Rambam, and the Rambam says no. The Rambam says there are different walls. Let's say, how many walls do we have external of the Kodesh on Tzafin side? Well, there's one wall that's known as Koisel HaHeichel. The next wall is called Ta. The next wall is called Koisel HaTa. The next wall, when it comes to Tzafin side, is called Masiba, and the next wall, when it comes to Tzafin side, is called Koisel HaMasiba. So the Rambam has a revolutionary interpretation in which he says that these walls, they weren't solid, but they were hollow. So there was space between one edge of the wall and the other edge of the wall. That space in between, that's what we call a ta. So what was the length of the ta, according to the Rambam? Well, it was almost 89 amas. It was a very long ta. It's a very long chamber, narrow and long. And we'll soon see how the Rambam interprets the words of the Mishnahs. Let's look at the Rambam inside. And the Rambam says as follows: from the west till the east, there's 400 amas. 100 cubits, 100 cubits. This is the calculation. Our box, this. So the Rambam starts when he described the height. Now he's going to give you the length. Usually from west to east, we consider it the length. Now it just so happens to be that the heichel is a rectangle. So if it's a rectangle, means that both from east to west and from west to east, we have the same amount, 100. We call one. The reason is because although the heichel, the length and the width was equal, but when it comes to the azara, the courtyard, which surrounds the heichel from all four sides, there's a difference between east and west and north and south. From east to west, the azara would be 187 amas. But from north to south, it's only 135 amas. So obviously from north to south, where the azara is narrower, is what we call width, and from east to west is what we call length. So the key here, both the length and the width were 100 amas. Which one does the Rambam describe first? From west to east, which is the length. And so he says, the Rambam says as follows. From west to east, 100 amma is 100 amma. This is the calculation. There's 4 walls, one inside of the other. So if we have 4 walls, how many spaces can we have between 4 walls? Why? 3. Between the first wall and the second, between the second and the third, and between the third and the fourth. And this is what the Rambam says. And the distance between these walls, between 4 walls, you have 3 spaces. So between the western wall of the azar of the courtyard and the wall which is inside of him, there is 5 amas. Between the second and third wall, there's 6 amas, 6 amas, the 6 cubits. And between this third wall and the fourth wall, there is 6 cubits. Which is based on Mishnah Zayin in the 4th chapter of Midas. And Mishnah Zayin says as follows: from Mizrach, unlike the Rambam who goes from Maidav to Mizrach, from west to east, so the Rambam goes, the Mishnah goes from east to west. So what is the first thing that it describes in the Mishnah? There's a ulam, there's a courtyard. There's not a courtyard, there's a hallway which leads before one enters the heichel, there's a hallway. And the length of the hallway was 11 cubits. And before this ulam, there was a kaisel ulam, there was a wall of the ulam. And the wall of the ulam was 5 cubits. So kaisel ulam chomish. The wall of the ulam is 5 cubits. The ulam achas esrei. And the ulam is 11. Kaisel heichel sheish. The wall of the heichel is 6 amas. So we have so far 5 and 11. And then there's 20 amas of the Holy of Holies. And then goes Koisel HaHeichel Sheish. So the wall of the Heichel is 6 cubits, and the Torah is 6 cubits, and the Koisel Torah is 5 cubits. Now, according to the Rambam, each of these spaces that the Mishnah over here is considering, each of these spaces is a Torah. So there are 3 times mentioned over here from Mizrach to Ma'alev. And this is what the Rambam is saying, but the Rambam is reversing the order, and he's going from west to east. So he says like this: that's the last wall that we mentioned. So there's 5 amas. That's the one before the last. The Mishnah, 6 cubits. And between the 3rd and the 4th, there's also 6 amas. That's what the Mishnah says. The wall of the Heichel is 6. Now the Rambam says these are measurements in it's from the thickness of the wall with the empty space between the 2 walls. In other words, if according to the Rambam, this is not only the space, but this is also the wall also occupies space. So the wall, for instance, when we talk about koisel, when we call some place koisel something, koisel ulam. So if it's called koisel ulam, so you need to know that 5 is the wall of the ulam together with the walls. So let's say each wall was an amma high. So if each wall was an amma high, so if each wall was an amma wide, so how much space is there in the space that's called Koisel Ulam? There's 3 amas, because 1 amma is for the western wall and western part of the wall, and the other amma is for the eastern part of the wall. Same thing as when it comes to Koisel HaHeichel Sheish. So when we say Hatosh Sheish, it's only the space in between the 2 walls that are called Koisel HaHeichel and Koisel HaTorah. When we measure that Koisel HaHeichel Sheish, it means, so the space in between was 4. Was 4 amas. Now the length of Kodesh HaKadoshim is 20 amas. And between those 2 paroichos that separate, between them and the Kodesh, there is a full amma. And the length of the Kodesh is 40 amma. And the thickness of the eastern wall, in which contains the gates, is 6 amas. And the ulam is 11 amas. And the thickness of the wall of the ulam is 5 amas. So in interesting is that I copied over here Va'oivi, and I'm assuming that it must have been in one of the manuscripts, but in other manuscripts it says it all of a sudden switches to a width, where till now we're talking about Oivi. He's going to check in Shinui Neschois, where they give you the full Shinui Neschois, see if anything is said over here. Beis Abchira, Perek Dalid. Yes. So it says V'roichav Koisel Ulam. That's in the manuscripts, and the print it says V'oivi HaKoisel. And I know that the be interesting later on to look into it. Let's continue. Nimta koil mea amma. So the total of everything is 100 amma. Now the Rambam is going to go from the north to south. Let's look the way Minatzofin Ladoroim is described in the Mishnah. The Mishnah gives a detailed, says Minatzofin Ladorim Shivim Amor. So north to south there's 70 amas. Va'ulam oidefol of 15 amma Minatzofin, 15 amma Minadorim v'yanikra b'sachalipos. The ulam was wider than the rest of the Heichel, 15 amas north and 15 amas south, and it was called Beisachalipos. And the why is it called Beisachalipos? Shom going zinas sakini, because over there we put away the knives. The knives with which you used to shech the karbonis. What happens, first of all, if a knife ever becomes disqualified? That's where you put it away. And maybe that was also a place of storage of knives. But in any case, Va'heichel tsar me'ach chayrav, and it says that the Heichel was narrow from the back. V'rachav milfanav, it was wide from the front. It's similar to a lion. Shneimar says in the pasuk, you can see that the Mikdash was compared to a lion. Just like a lion is narrow behind and located broad in front. So the sanctuary was narrow behind and broad in front. So we hear there's a major difference between the Rambam and everybody else. Everybody else learns that the Heichel was not a rectangle of 100 and 100. So what was the width from north to south? It depends. If you're talking the body of it, which includes, one would say, which includes 16 amas, because no, it includes 84 amas from going from the west till up to that ulam, because the balance was the ulam itself, which was 11 cubits, and there was a wall at the east of the ulam called Koisala Ulam, which was 5 amas. So altogether that's 16. So in order to get the total of the rest of it, all you have to do is deduct 16 from 100 and you have 84. So these 84 amas were only on the width of 70 amas. But the first 16 amas, which included the wall of the ulam and the ulam itself, they extended 15 amas north of this structure, and 15 amas south of the structure for a total of 30 amas. 30 amas plus 70 is 100. But the Rambam disagrees with that, and the Rambam says no, it was 100 and 100. So if it was 100 and 100, so what does it mean that the ulam extended 15 amas? It means not because in the beginning he's telling you what the structure is of the Beis Hamikdash at the time, and then he says the ulam extended on it not only from the east but also from the north and the south, which means how did it have 15 amas? 5 amas was an extension of the Kaisel ulam, just like the Kaisel ulam on Mizrach was 5 amas. Likewise, on Dorim and Tzafin, the Kaisel ulam was also 5 amas each. 5 amas in Dorim and 5 amas in Tzafin. So it comes out that the space in between the Kaisel ulam and the rest of the structure, which includes the walls of the Kaisel Masiba or Kaisel Beisarat Samayim, or all those that the Rambam refers to as Toim, is 10 amas. Let's look inside the Rambam Halacha Hey. In Atzafin Ladorim Meya'ama, from the north to south, there's 100 amas. Oivi Kaisel ulam Chomish amas. The thickness of the wall of the ulam is 5 amas. Kaisel ulam at Kaisel HaKodesh 10 amas. From the wall of the ulam till the wall of Kodesh is 10 amas, which means the external wall of the Kodesh. The Koislei HaKodesh, how many walls are there to the Kodesh? Shishak Solim Zalif Zeh. There's 6 walls, one inside of another. Uveineyen Chamisha Mekoimis Prim, and between these 6 walls there are 5 spaces. Ben Koisel Chitzoy Vein Hasheni Chamishamis, between the external wall and the next wall closest to it, there's 5 amas. When Sheni Shlishi Sholish amas, between the second and the third there's 3 amas. When Shlishi Ravi Chomish, and between the third and the fourth there's 5. When Navi B'Chamishi Sheish, between the fourth and the fifth there's 6. When Chamishi B'Kaisel Aprimi Sheish, and between the fifth and the inner wall there's 6. Now it seems from the Rambam that this external wall and the second wall, when we say 5 amas, it includes the wall itself. So the space in between these 2 walls was only 3 amas, because we have to deduct 1 amma for one wall and 1 more amma for the other wall. When Sheni Shlishi Shalish amas, that's just space. When Shlishi Ravi Chomesh, again, that's 3 amas space and 2 amas are the walls. When Ravi Chamishi Sheish, that one is a larger, it's double the size. That chamber is double the size of the other chambers. That's why it's known as Hatostam, the chamber. Why is it called the chamber? Because it was the widest chamber. When Chamishi Kaisla Primi Sheish, again we're talking including the space of the walls, the space that the walls themselves occupied. So the space between those walls was only 4. Unless we're going to say that for some reason on the side of the Heichel it was actually thicker, so that space was also 3. But in any case, so if you count, right, 5 ben Koisel Chitzin ben Hasheni, and 3 ben Sheni Shlishi, and ben Shlishi Ravi Chomesh, so there's 13. Ben Ravi Chamishi Sheish is it's already 19. Ben Chamishi v'Kaisel Apnimi Sheish, so it's 25. And we add to it the 15 on one side of so it's 40, and the same thing on the other side. It's also 40, 25 plus 15. In other words, the 15 is of the ulam, the Kaisel ulam with the ulam. So Nimtzah Koila, Boy Mam Tzadzer, Boy Mam Tzadzer, she connected 40 amma from this side and 50 amma from the other side. And the width of the Beis Hamikdash from inside, whether Beis Kodesh or Kodesh Kedoshim, is 20 ammas, and 8 ammas, so we find that it's altogether 100 ammas. Now the Rambam tells us there was something called a psipus. A psipus was a shara kotin. Whenever you see a psipus, it means a small gate. The Heichel had 2 small gates. In the midst of the entrance to the Heichel, there was a big gate. So there was a small gate. Now this small gate, and the Rambam draws in order to, the Rambam tells you a lot of things, but the Rambam also gives you a drawing, which he's going to give it to you at the very end of Halacha 8. He's going to add words that don't exist in most of the prints of the Rambam, but it was first printed in the Rambam that I had published in the year Tafshin on Aleph, which was the first Rambam to contain these words that the Rambam wrote. And he says, this is the shape of the entire Heichel according to its length and width. And over there it gives the shape. And if you look at that shape, it's very easy to tell. You can see the space in Tzafin, and now, for some reason, this is the only place, usually when it came to the drawings of the Rambam, because we don't have the actual manuscript of the Rambam, what's interesting is the Meiri, he wanted to make drawings on for the Beis HaMikdash. But then he thought better of it, and he decided not to make the drawings. And he said, what happens is, if I the author, I'll make drawings, I'll invest time and effort to make precise drawings so everybody can understand. But what's going to happen is, how do we copy this book? Why? Some other scribe is going to come and going to copy from me. And every copyist adds some errors of his own, because nobody can be as precise as the author himself. So what's the point? So the Meiri says, I'll rather not make the drawings and let everybody try to figure it out on his own head. But the Rambam had a different method, and apparently the Rambam knew somehow that eventually, even though his manuscript of the Beis HaBchira did not survive, we don't have it nowadays, it survived for many, many years. What happened was the great-grandchildren of the Rambam lived in Egypt, and his son Rabbi Avram lived in Egypt. And he had a grandson, Yeshua HaNogid, who also lived in Egypt, but the great-grandson, Rabbi David HaNogid, eventually at some point, he moved from Egypt to Syria. And in Syria, he was in the city known as Aram Tsoiva, which the Arabs call Khalev. In Aleppo, actually in Arabic, it's called Aleppo. In Aleppo, that's where they lived for many, many, many years. So for many, many years, the Rambam's manuscript was in Aleppo. At some point, Goyim started, Jews became poor, and somehow they were able to get it out of it. That's how some of the Rambam's manuscript ended up in Oxford. And most of the Mishnah Torah, the Mishnah Torah itself, the actual manuscript of the Rambam, we don't know where it is. Maybe somebody hid it, but nobody knows where it is. But the manuscript of the Rambam of Pirush Mishnayos, some of it, some guy hauled off to Oxford, and I think a guy by the name Huntington, the Huntington collection in Oxford, and others made it and ended making it up. A Jewish Gvir by the name Sasson. It's known as the Sasson manuscript. I think at one point the British Railroad company invested in it because they figured it's a good, safe investment. And at some point, I think they sold it to the Jerusalem Library. And I think that's where it is. But in any case, so the manuscript of the Rambam of Pirush Mishnayos had survived. And a copy of it, Rabbi Gorman, there was a Yid in Copenhagen who reprinted from the Rambam's manuscript, many copies, I don't know, 100 copies, 200 copies numbered. And Rabbi Gorman from London had located three copies. The last, I guess, must have been the last three copies of it. Many years later, after it was printed, he located three copies, kept one copy for himself, and I believe he gave one copy to the Rebbe, which is still in the Rebbe's library, and one copy he sold to Chaim Meir Lieberman. So when I was working on this Sefer, I believe I either took from the Rebbe's library, made a copy, or I took directly from Chaim Meir Lieberman and made a copy from him. And I instituted it in the print of the book. According to the Rebbe's instructions, the Rebbe said after I had printed, when I originally printed it in my father's book, I didn't do any facsimiles of manuscripts. And the Rebbe sent out like a sharp note and saying that it's a waste that I didn't utilize the opportunity to accompany it with facsimiles of the Rambam's of the handwritings of the Rambam's manuscripts of the Rambam, and especially of a signature, which there's three different ways that Rambam used to sign his name. So obviously, I took the time, and the Rebbe even referred to researchers that researchers already wrote about it. And that's when I took the time to do some of that research, or and get those three signatures. But also, we asked the Rebbe if the Rebbe wanted, because till then, when it came to the pictures, instead of using the drawings of the manuscript, which after all are not as precise as the Rambam's own handwriting, since many of them are identical in the Pirush HaMishnayos, in this commentary in the Mishnah, we took and we copied from the commentary in the Mishnah. But in the original print, I took from Kapach's print, who it turns out that he printed according to the manuscript of the Rambam, but it's not the actual handwriting of the Rambam. And then in the second edition, I actually inserted the actual handwriting of the Rambam, besides for this one place, in the end of Halacha 8, where the Rambam is going to say, the reason is because over there in the Mishnah, there's an argument when it comes to the details of the Pishtush. When we'll soon get to when we finish reading Halacha 8, we'll discuss what Yehuda says, what Chachamim say, and the Rambam, since he's ought to explain the Mishnahs, he explains both the Shittas of Rabbi Yehuda and Chachamim. But when it comes to Mishnah Torah, the Rambam only tells you the way the halacha is. He doesn't give you all the different opinions. So the wording is also changed, and so over there I copied from one of the manuscripts. But the word pishpesh, which exists in the Rambam's original manuscript in Mishnah in the Pirush HaMishnayos, it's not there in the copy of this manuscript from which I published. Now, actually, the Rambam writes Psipis. It's not so clear, but it could look like he writes Pispis, just without Psipis. But anyways, he writes those words, and for some reason, the words that make it to the copy could be this copyist just wasn't precise. I see in the Frankel edition, he copies the word psipis also over there. Anyways, so psipis means that small gate, and that was so usually when it comes, for instance, there's a koisel that the Rambam calls Zehu Amakim Anikra Koisel. Now that I'm looking at that manuscript that I ended up copying in the Rambam, I see that there are some other errors over there, very blatant errors. Rambam seems to write twice, and that is definitely not correct. And you can see in the Rambam's manuscript itself, he says, Zaha Mokoim Hanikra Mesiba. Zaha Mokoim Nikra Mesiba. It's not so clear in the manuscript but you can see that Rambam writes Zaha Mokoim Nikra Mesiba. So this place, which is called Mesiba, so it seems from the Rambam that it didn't have a door to it. It had just an opening. It wasn't closed off either. But the one that's called Ta, which surrounds the whole bais, and it's actually large, that one seems to be had a pispis, a little small gate that opened to it, that you could open and close. So now the Rambam is talking about this small gate. The Rambam says as follows. A psipis or sharakota in the psipis is a small gate. Hold on a second. The Heichel had two small gates from the side of the big gate, which is in the middle. One is in the north and one is in the south. Regarding this the big gate, it says by Yecheskel, so what these gates serve? The big gate, nobody ever entered through the big gate. And through the southern gate, also nobody entered. For all of them, and regarding him, it's explicit by Yecheskel. This gate should be closed, it shouldn't be open. And in the north, this is the one through which you enter, the small gate of the north. When he walks between the two walls, till he gets to a place which is open to the Kodesh from the left side of the Kodesh. Remember, since the Kodesh is, you enter Kodesh, you're facing Maidav, you're facing the west. So the left of the Kodesh would be, Tzafin would be north. And he enters into the Heichel. And he walks till till he gets to the great gate, and he opens it. So he doesn't open it from the outside, but he goes in from the inside. In other words, he opens up once he gets into the Heichel, then he walks into, in other words, yes, obviously the big gate is opened, but the big gate is open not from the outside, just from the inside. And how does he get in the inside? From the north. I just want to get to, we don't have that much more time. I just want to get to halacha tes. Halacha Tes begins with the words V'zui Tfuras HaHeichel V'fimidas Orkei V'roch Boi. This is the beginning, this is the shape of the entire Heichel. According to the length, according to the measurement of the length and its width. And the Rambam gives here that picture, and everybody can look at the picture. I guess I posted them, and Rabbi Cohen would have posted them. So the Rambam continues, the Heichel, its building was wide from the front and narrow from the back like a lion. Now we said, according to the Rambam, you wouldn't understand how exactly is the building narrow from the front and wide from the front and narrow from the back like a lion. So if you look in the shape of the Rambam, I'm going to try to, I don't know if I took a picture of this. I have it in my book. Take a picture. Hold on a second. Okay, so I just sent Rabbi Cohen a picture of the we can see how the Rambam makes a picture of Maidav and Mizrach and makes it a little narrow. But it seems from the Rambam that, let's say, we say it's 100 and 100, it wasn't exactly 100 and 100, but from Mizrach, it would, let's say, be 101 or 102, and from Maidav, it would be 98. So it's a little ever slightly goes a little narrower as it goes more west. It becomes a little more, a drop more narrower. That's what seems to be the way that Rambam learns. What's interesting and fascinating is the Rambam continues. There were porches all around the house outside of this Kaisel Masiba, of these 5 walls that we were talking about, 6 walls. The 6 walls that contain the 5 spaces, which are called Toim. The bottom porch is 5 amas, and there's a rock above it, 6, that extends outwards of its ceiling. The middle porch is 6, and then there's a rock standing over it that's 7, and the 7th one, the top one is the height of extends 7 amas. It says that the bottom porch, etc. And these 3 porches would surround the house from 3 directions. Now, which 3 directions? It's not clear from the Rambam, but it would make sense to say that it was the three directions were north, south, and west, because the east was the Heichel really didn't have so much of a front. The Heichel was occupied with these walls. In other words, the spaces between the walls were all on the east. On the west, there was one closure. V'chein, and likewise, saviv l'kislei ulam, around the walls of the ulam. Till now, we're talking about the walls of the Heichel, of the Kodesh. What about these structures? What about the walls of the ulam milmata ad lamaylo kachoyu? From the bottom till the top, this is the way they were. Amo achas cholok, one amo, smooth, v'roivat shalish amis, and it sticks out 3 amas. What sticks out would be the height of 3 amas. The amo cholok v'roivat shalish amis ad lamaylo. Okay, and then there would be an amma of plane in which there was not sticking out, and then there was a rock sticking out for 3 amas till above. And my father suggested that not only did it go that way in the height, but also in the width. In other words, that each rock, which was tall 3 amas, also went 3 amas, and then there was space. So then it looked nice and colorful. Take a picture and send it. There's a picture that we had Rabbi Weinfeld, I think she made according something that made according to Rabbi Weinfeld's explanation. Okay. Okay, we're gonna take Amrit Hashem. We looking forward to the Beis Hamikdash being rebuilt, and then we're gonna see everything in a much greater clarity. The Mehed of Yameinu Amen. Thanks so much.
Thank you very, very much. Amen to the brachas, and the Ibn Alpha will be a great tour guide for Mehed of Yameinu very soon. Thank you everyone for joining. Thank you for the Ma'aganim. And of course, the grace and shkach and bracha v'atzlach to Rabbi Yosef, to Rabbi Keller, all the good things.
Amen. Kol tov. Bye.
Kol tov.